Bonjour, YouTube. Welcome back to Long Story Short, where I recount my life in a video memoir to my children so that they have the complete story of my life, where I came from, and the struggles that I went through. My name is Bruno Berry. I was born in 1970 in Sacramento, California, at Mercy Hospital. My mother, Ella, was married to my father for a short period of time. She has 4 children with 3 different fathers. Now, back in the 60s and 70s, we were in the second phase of feminism, second wave feminism. So, if a sociology professor were to frame this, my mother was part of the sexual revolution, women's empowerment, and independent women. This is when it all started. So, it just speaks to the times that my mother, coming from an intact family, then would hop from man to man to man, never being able to hold a job for very long until later in life, constantly moving from man to man, having multiple children with multiple men. So, this is not to demonize her, this is just a sign of the times. If a sociology professor were to document this, it just falls right in line with second wave feminism. Now, this video isn't about feminism, but it is in a weird, twisted way. So, my mother in the early 60s met my sister's dad, Carrie's dad. His name was Frank Mooney, and they had a baby out of wedlock. She ended up leaving him. Stories that she told me is this, that he wasn't right for her. He was a nice guy, and he was a typical, she just had a baby with him and left immediately. And in fact, my sister never even met her father until she was 20 years old, I think. I'll talk about that in later videos. So she left Frank Mooney, got with my dad, and my dad had my sister Lana, who's 5 years older than me, and then me in 1970. Of course, there was a stillborn baby in between, but that's what I covered in my first video. So my mother has 4 children, 3 different fathers, and her life is moving along with this feminist ideology about women not having to stay in marriages where they're not happy. Now, so my father was an entrepreneur, and from what I understand, my father and my mother had 2 businesses. They had a curtain business and they had a fiber boat a fiberglass boat business on the American River. One of the first, matter of fact, the first business on the American River, renting or building fiberglass boats and a gas station, I believe. So my mother ended up, now at the time I didn't know this, but let me just jump to 2014 or 15. My mother admitted to me some things that she did in the marriage. Now, nobody knows these things except for my mother and I. So there's this saying that, there's your truth and my truth and the truth. I don't believe in your truth and my truth. No, I just believe in the truth. But you could kind of classify this as my truth because nobody knows this except for me. Nobody knows that my mother confessed all these things that I'm going to divulge in the video. This is not to bring up grievances or past grievances. This is just to give you the context of my childhood. So while I'm over these things, and I certainly respect my mom to a certain degree, I also am estranged from her somewhat, have very little contact with her because of these issues. Now, a lot of psychologists, and I've talked about this in counseling, they say that people, they hold on to these bitter memories about their childhood. I'm very happy. Let me just say this again. I'm going to say this in every video. In my life now, I am very happy. I have an intact family. I have a relationship overseas. I have Bella. I'm in a good relationship. Everything is fine. I'm just recounting these to share my personal history with my kids. So my mother ended up with these 2 businesses. I think one at the curtain business. She ended up stealing money out of the cash register or from the wherever the cash was being kept. And my father couldn't figure out where this money had went, and my mother wouldn't confess that she stole the money. So it caused a big disruption in their marriage. She ended up leaving my father over it, or that was one of the reasons. Listen, I can't go into all the dynamics that was going on at the time, but my mother would tell me stories that my father's business, like he was giving free stuff away at his job, at the business, at the boat business. Um, he wasn't paying for the bills. You know, they were struggling. I can understand how an entrepreneur starting these businesses was struggling, and then she was hindering that success by stealing money, not confessing, manipulating my father emotionally. I'm only putting this context into the story because I understand female nature now. I understand female dynamics, interpersonal dynamics. I have this whole slew of information and wisdom that I have now that I couldn't, of course, as a child, I didn't understand these things. Women can certainly be agents of chaos. And my father probably was not perfect. And so they were having these marital problems. So they got divorced. Now, this is about 1973. My older sister, Carrie and Lana were there. My brother wasn't born yet, so it was just us three. And my mother confessed to me that she began making false allegations about my father sexually abusing my 7-year-old sister at the time. So when he would come, now they weren't taken seriously at the time. And what happened was, so when he would come to visit, I'm pretty sure she told me she fabricated the story. So it wasn't true that he was abusing her. But my father was scared. I can just imagine that he's scared. He doesn't want any of these false allegations. So when he would come for visitation on the weekends, he would only take me. He refused to take my sister, which is perfect. He was trying to keep himself safe. So one of my first memories when I was 3 years old was my father taking me to San Francisco. That's this photo you see of the man standing with his son. I remember that day very clearly. He got me an orange soda. He had this. He gave me some mozzarella cheese. It didn't taste very good, but I remember the salt air. He was very calm. I don't remember us talking, but I just remember being very loved and protected by him. That's just the feeling I get. But there was other things going on with my mom. So during that time, my mother met my stepfather, my future stepfather, and she wanted to leave the state of California with us kids and move to Florida. So my mother went to family court. She levied these false allegations against my father. The judge or the court gave her permission to leave the state, and she essentially, with the court's permission, kidnapped us and took us on this road trip all the way to Bartow, Florida. Now, during that time, my stepfather was extremely abusive towards me. I don't want to go into all the details of what he was doing, but he was physically beating me, emotionally abusing me when no one was there. Nobody knows about this except for me. My mother was neglecting me. She would leave me with neighbors while she would go on truck driving trips with my stepdad. Neighbors had eventually abused me physically, beating me, leaving welts and marks on my body. My mother came home from the 3-day trip with my dad, found him, and then, I don't know what happened after that, but she knew I was being abused. And then she was committing abuse upon me, and my stepfather was committing abuse against me. And so it was a very traumatic time for me. Now, I'm not saying my whole entire childhood was filled with just all this horrible abuse, but for a 5-year-old boy, it was very traumatic. And my mother was manipulating my stepfather to do these abuses in her name. Like she was manipulating him to beat me. One time when I peed the bed, he beat me with a belt while I was naked. She would feed me. I wasn't a very good eater, so when my stepdad would come home, she would have him beat me for not eating. It was just the whole thing. So about a few months later, I don't know exactly the timeline, but my father, Lauren, he had a 1970s era Riviera blue with one of those cone windows in the back. He drove all the way from California to Florida. And he reconciled with my mom a little bit while my stepdad wasn't there. I remember being so happy to see him. I remember seeing his car drive up and I was excited. He came in the house. He held me. I was crying. I felt relief that I felt like he was saving me. So my dad said that he was going to take my sister and I to Disney World down there in Florida for 2 weeks. and my mom let us go. But my dad had other plans. My dad was not finished with this fight. He took us to Disney World. We had a great time. We went to the beach. I remember we went and saw this nice Florida beach, and there was these tide pools. And I remember seeing this stingray that was trapped in one of the, the tide pools. I remember swimming in the ocean, playing in the waves with my sister. Great memory. And then he took us in the car, and instead of taking us home, he took us on a 4-month odyssey on the road in his car from Georgia to Virginia, all the way to Colorado. Now, during that time, we were living in the car. My father would stop. He didn't have any work or any money, so he would stop at grocery stores. He would stuff food down our pants, lunch meats, and things like that, and steal from the store to feed us. Now, that was all very fun for me, but I remember being hungry several times. I remember being so hungry one time we had a can of tuna fish, and we ate the tuna fish, and then I licked the can clean because I was so hungry. But my dad took me to a shop one time, bought me a knife. He very meticulously and carefully explained to me knife etiquette and how to be careful with the knife. I was only 5. He would sit me on his lap while we were driving, and he would let me hold the steering wheel, and he would tell me how to not fixate on the road, to every once in a while glance off to the right and left so your eyes don't get tired. He was giving me these life lessons that I remember to this day. And one time we were at a encampment because we were camping, and there was some raw bacon, and I was so hungry I went and got into the raw bacon and ate the bacon. And he told me, "Hey, you don't eat raw bacon." But later on, I disobeyed him, and I went and ate some more raw bacon. And he beat the shit out of me. He spanked me with a belt with my pants on. No, it was his hand. It was his hand. He beat me, and my legs. Now, later on, I told my mom that my dad beat me severely and that he tried to burn me in a fire. But what happened was he picked me up, my legs raked across the coals of the campfire, and he beat me. I didn't get burned. I lied later and said it was, because I was trying to say that my dad was abusive so my mother would, sympathize with me. And anyway, that's just what kids do. Kids tend to do those types of things. But my sister at the time was 10 years old. She was talking to this older teenage boy at the camp. My father intervened and took us and wouldn't let her see the boy. My sister got mad. Then when my dad had us in a hotel room, he left us there alone. My sister took me out and tried to get the police and say we were kidnapped. The police came. My dad talked to them and said, no, that she's just mad because I disciplined her. My dad did backhand her. He came back after she talked to the cop and he slapped the shit out of her. So now my she's in that pre-adolescent, pre-pubescent rage, being rebellious. And then my father took us again. Now we're heading towards Colorado. I remember we stayed on a barge one night and we got kicked off the barge because the barge took off on the river. We hid. The spotlights caught us. The police caught us again. They let us go. And then we ended up in Colorado. And my father had stayed with multiple women along the way. My dad was a very good-looking, handsome man, and he was very good with ladies apparently because he always had a woman somewhere wherever we stopped. So this time in Colorado, my sister and I were left alone with this woman that he was seeing in her apartment. And then my sister told her that we had been kidnapped. She called the police. And I just remember it being very cold and snowy outside. And I saw these cop car lights. They took us into custody. And I'm sure that my dad probably came back, saw the cop car lights, and jetted. So he evaded the law. So now at this time, the courts, this is what I learned later on, that the courts were confused. They were understandably confused. And they were like, well, you made these allegations against them, but then you let them go off with the kids, and now they kidnapped them. So we had to stay in foster care while they sorted out the big mess. So I don't know if it was weeks or if it was months, but I remember I was shuffling between at least two foster care homes. And it was a very pleasant experience, actually. I got to play with other kids. I did miss my mom. I missed my dad. I was torn. It was a very difficult, I was in survival mode as a child. I was torn between loving my dad, loving my mom, but then living in an abusive environment. So the courts eventually gave us back to my mom. And then we ended up in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and I went to Watson Elementary School, where I was held back a year while my sister got to advance. And because we moved around so much, I was getting bullied severely by other children. I was kind of a wimpy kid. Wasn't confident. I would be chased home from school. My mother wasn't protecting me. My stepfather was abusing me. I was being neglected, and also my little brother was born in '75. So my stepdad always centered on him, and then abused me, hated me, told me so several times. He hated me, and so it was just a very difficult time. So then we moved from there because I guess my stepfather had a job at some oil company. Miller Drilling Company is what it was called. Miller Drilling Company. I remember jackets that he had. So we moved from Arkansas to Oklahoma, and we spent a little bit of time there. Then I guess apparently my stepdad started writing bad checks, overdrawing accounts because he was trying to support a woman and 4 kids, one kid being his. And then I saw instances where my mother was abusing him also. I came in one day and she had a lamp holding over his head, trying to hit him with it, and he was crying. So I'm sure that my mother's a very difficult person. And she went with this man who was abusing her. He wasn't abusing my sisters. He was only abusing me. He was very loving to my brother, Kevin. And so then eventually we moved up to Redmond, Washington. But by that time, the cops had an APB out on my stepdad. And then my mother, I went to school a short time in Redmond, Washington. Then my mom, we were so poor and destitute that the church had to bring us a Thanksgiving meal up in Redding. And we had this nice house, but the church was bringing us food. So my mother went down to Sacramento. And then my mom went on welfare, and we were living in Sacramento in the South area in another bad neighborhood. So I was in 4th grade by that time. So anyway, that's chapter 2. Chapter 3, I will tell you how I came to join the military, some other things about my teenage years, how I got into the positions that I did, and tell you about all the things that happened to me in Sacramento. Thanks for joining me. See you in chapter 3.